on behalf of Citizens for the Constitution. Citizens for the Constitution is a multi-faith group with an objective to defend the Constitution and its value of equality, freedom, human dignity, religious freedom, and social justice. We first met at YMCA exactly last year, and we were around 100 plus people there. And we had Honorable Tistaji, Irfan Sir, Professor Ram Kumar, Sham Dada Gaikwad, Pastor David Fernandez, Dolphy D'Souza, Comrade Ahmad, and many people were there. And then we decided to bring awareness in Mumbai and its area. So we had subsequent meetings, one in Bhandup and one in Kalina. We had also Dr. Vivek Montero with us and our friend Advocate Lara Jasani. Then due to lockdown, we were not able to meet physically, but we had two webinars. One was with our friend Advocate Mihir Desai. And then second was, of course, with Dr. Ram Punyani. And we had a very good response and many questions. People are really excited. And we tend to take forward this. And once again, we thank you for all of you for joining this. And today, being 2nd October, I know it's very hectic schedule. People are busy. But being 2nd October, our first anniversary, we thought that we will go ahead. So once again, thank you very much for joining, especially our honorable guest. We welcome you on behalf of Citizens for the Constitution. Over to the Dolphy. Is Dolphy joined?
No, he's not here right now.
Neha, please take over. Neha? Neha?
Yeah. I'm here.
Please take over. Please take over. Introduce all the guests today.
Yeah. Just give me one moment. It's not very easy to introduce such prominent speakers, but it's I think it's a very pleasant duty given to me. So let us begin with Rajni Bakshi. Rajni Bakshi is a very well-known Mumbai-based author. She holds a BA in Journalism and Political Science from George Washington University and an MA in Philosophy from University of Rajasthan. She is a member of the Executive Committee of the Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, an autonomous body under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Rajni was awarded the Homi Bhabha Fellowship in 2000. From 2013 to 16, Rajni was Gandhi Peace Fellow at Gateway House, Indian Council on Global Relations, a Mumbai-based foreign policy think tank. She serves on the boards of Child Rights and You, that is CRY, Citizen for Peace, and the Center of Education and Documentation, CED. She has authored many books, including Bazaars, Conversations, and Freedom for a Market Culture Beyond Greed and Fear, and many other. For example, there's Bapu, Kuti, Journeys in Rediscovery of Gandhi. So like I said, she's a prolific writer, and we are very happy. She's very active when it comes to democratic movements and Gandhi. She's synonymous when it comes to experts and scholars on Gandhi. So we welcome Rajni Bakshi. Second, we have Ram Punyani. Ram Punyani is currently the chairperson of the Center for Study of Society and Secularism. He is also associated with various other secular and democratic initiatives, namely All India Secular Forum, CSSS, and ANHAR. Prior to being an activist, he was a professor with the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, until he took voluntary retirement in the year 2004. He has authored several articles and books, including Communal Politics, Religion, Power and Violence, Ambedkar and Hindutva Politics, etc. He's also the recipient of the National Communal Harmony Award and the National Confederation of Human Rights Organization Mukundan C. Menon Award. His writings has appeared in Indian Express, Scroll, The Quint and Newsclick. So again, a very prolific writer, and we're very glad that he's here because we know the kind of sensation he is on YouTube and the kind of audience he attracts and enthralls. So welcome, Ram. Then we have Prabodh Parekh. Prabodh Parekh is a Gujarati poet, short fiction writer, and visual artist. At present, he is faculty in charge of art, literature, and culture, Whistling Woods International. Prior to that, he was professor at the Department of Philosophy at Mirabai College, Mumbai, where he retired as the head of department in the year 2005. He was Charles Wallace Fellow at the University of Liverpool and a visiting fellow, University of Sorbonne, Paris, where he conducted seminar on aspects of Indian literature, cinema, and paintings. His book of poems, Counsman between parentheses in brackets, published in 1993, is a significant collection in Gujarati literature representing 30 years of work in poetry. It won him several awards, including the Best Poetry Collection of 1993-94, Gujarati Sahitya Academy, and the G.F. Saraf Award for the Best Gujarati book in 1992-95. So again, a very prominent poet, and we're very, very glad that he's here today in this panel discussion. Then we have Irfan Engineer, who is currently the director of the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, a civil society organized based in Bombay. He is, Mumbai. He has a long track record of advocacy for marginalized communities, spending years working on behalf of trade union members, urban slum dwellers, scheduled tribes, and migrant laborers. Mr. Engineer has also organized hundreds of training workshops and seminars dedicated to improving relations between communities and religious groups. He has also written articles in newspapers and journals, and currently he's the associate editor of the Indian Journal of Secularism. So, as I said, it's an esteemed panel today that we have on this occasion of Gandhi Jayanti. With this, can I welcome? Before we welcome, we know what has happened to Manisha, the very young girl who has been a victim of such brutal violence, and there are protests all over the country. So with the permission of the speakers, can we just observe a minute of silence? I think it's due because she fought so valiantly for her life. It's also a question of democratic rights, and especially Constitution, as we are all here for. So I think 1 minute of silence, if we can all observe, that would be nice. All right. With this, I welcome this very esteemed panel for a very interesting and stimulating discussion today. Can we please begin with Rajni Bakshi?
Thank you. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes. We do have some time for question and answer session, 15 minutes. I request anyone who has a question to please leave their questions in the chat box. It will be not possible for us to unmute everyone, so we will read out the questions to the speakers later. Sorry, Rajni Bakshi, please go ahead.
No. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we meet actually on a day where the contrast between our aspiration for nonviolence and the parallel presence of really what I think has to be called absolute evil. In philosophical terms, if you were to ask me in a philosophical discussion, I could wax eloquent for hours about how there is no absolute evil. And certainly in our mythic consciousness on this subcontinent, we do not, our ancestors did not, they've grappled with the problem of evil, but we have tended not to think that evil can be absolute. And yet what we are seeing, and the thing is that this current tragedy is more horrific, more painful, more frightening, because it seems to be in a continuum. It's not an isolated incident. That is what makes it so much more difficult for all of us who aspire to live in and to cultivate a civilized society. That, how do we, and I know that, and correctly so, a lot of the attention at the moment does need to be on the specific details of who has abdicated their duty, in what ways the system keeps failing us over and over again. All those are absolutely important issues. But I thought that in this forum, we could focus on what is the underlying challenge. And I don't know if it helps, but the truth is that Gandhiji saw this and much more, much worse. Not just during the partition violence, which I'm sure everybody in this group has read about, does not bear any repetition here. But before that, in Noakhali, and if you read the accounts of the people who were accompanying him, by then he's almost 79, and they are walking from village to village, bearing witness to people telling them of the unspeakable things that have been done in the violence. And if you read the accounts of his companions in that Noakhali phase, you realize what kind of mental trauma Gandhiji is going through at that time. And it's for this reason that it is very difficult, to come face to face with absolutely raw evil in this way. And yet, the reason why we are still celebrating or observing October 2nd and as the International Day of Nonviolence is because from the depths of that despair and horror, he is still able to keep faith in the ideal. And I think this is because it's not some kind of learned moral ideal. It's not, some kind of created, man-made ethic for Gandhiji. And this is what I want to share with you today. That when Gandhiji said that nonviolence is as old as the hills, I am not sufficiently well versed to know in minute detail. Somebody should actually do that study, or maybe it's already done, tracing back to us every step of his intellectual and his personal journey, how he came to that conclusion with such conviction that nonviolence is as old as the hills. But in the last 70 more years that since he died, or rather since he was killed, multidisciplinary research has confirmed this. In Gandhiji's time, he was saying it against the force of dominant ideas. And the dominant idea of that time was that our species, the sapiens survived and became the dominant species of the planet because we are the descendants of the killer ape. That part of the ape family that was more capable of brutality, more capable of violence, and therefore it, prevailed and dominated over others. That theory has been discredited pretty much completely. And why? Because more research has now shown us that it is our capacity for mutuality, it is our capacity for cooperation, it is our capacity for nurturance that has brought us to a point where we are able to, well, invent technology like this, which allows all of us to meet as we are just now. Now, so I'm suggesting to you that this debate about who we fundamentally are as a species is, according to me, settled. What remains and why the non-violence is a challenge in everyday life is that whatever our fundamental nature as a species may be, that does not solve or take care of the problem of sadism, of deliberate inflicting of pain on others and enjoying it. That is why this technology is, as somebody wrote a book about the 20th century, calling the whole century a terrible beauty. And that's why technology is such a terrible paradox, I will call it. Because not only are people committing unspeakable acts of cruelty, they are often recording it and sharing it because it clearly gives them some kind of pleasure to do so. And they think, and clearly there's an audience also that, watches that and gets a vicarious thrill. So I must tell you that I've tried to believe that I've become a hardened soul, but each of these episodes its first impact is to raise a sense of helplessness. How do you deal with this? But that first impulse has to pass. We have to overcome that first reaction of of a kind of helpless outrage, and that's why I shared this about fundamental nature, because I'm more disturbed by people who, on the basis of these actions that we are disturbed by, say, oh, human beings are like that only. No, human beings are not like that only. Just because there are enough human beings who are capable of this kind of cruelty, that is not a comment on our species as a whole. It is not a reflection of what we are fundamentally. And I think so one is that Gandhiji, in the last 70 years, we have seen research which has validated Gandhiji's conviction, number one. Number two, that enough work has been done. Well, I mean, it's never enough, sorry. I mean, lots of work has been done, which has shown us that the only way to address such violence is by fighting for restorative justice. Because if anything is doubly disturbing, it is this idea that, in a sense, lining up the perpetrators and shooting them or hanging them in public will somehow stop further such crimes from happening. I'm sorry, but the evidence from across the world is overwhelmingly against this assumption. And the only hope probably lies in firstly, I think, de-glamorizing violence. I really don't know how one does this in an age, except to keep growing the opposite. De-glamorize violence and always be willing to look for what are the sources of this brutalization. How does somebody come? How does a human being come to this state of, and by the way, we can't say animal state. That's really an insult to animals, because in the animal kingdom, actually, it's very rare, apparently. I'm not saying there isn't brutality, but it is really, it's a kind of subhuman brutality that people are reduced to. How we need to understand at a systemic level, how is this kind of a tendency towards brutality being, in a sense, nurtured by circumstances, by larger, systems. Also, definitely the impunity that governance systems are giving, but even that is not the source. That is only a facilitator. And at a time like this, one feels very hesitant to talk loosely or talk very easily about restorative justice. But I would just close by saying that hating the hater is not going to solve the problem. I'm sorry to say something so obvious, but I have found in many forums that it bears repeating. And challenging though this may seem, and it may seem very counterintuitive on a day like this, but really, at the end of the day, only lighting more lamps, and those lamps have to take the form of love and the ability to keep creating systems which will help to prevent at least more people from becoming so brutalized that they are capable of things like this. I'll close here for now. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to be part of your this community.
Thank you, Rajni. Thank you. You brought out some very salient points which we need to reiterate today, and the whole moral decadence of the society. So thank you. With this, I would like to invite Ram Punyani to put forth his viewpoints. Ram, over to you. Ram, please unmute yourself.
I think
we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me, Neha?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we can.
So, friends, first of all, on this anniversary of Father of the Nation, as we all pay tribute to him, I begin with a small note of pain and anguish. Generally, I don't see Twitter too much, but I do feel like retweeting some of the good things. And today, when I went on Twitter, the two top trends, which were very shocking to me, one was upholding Nathuram Godse. Nathuram Godse, Amar Rahe was on the top. And the second one, surprisingly, was that about Sudarshan TV. Sudarshan TV, which spreads, which latest contribution was that UPSC jihad, civil service jihad. Second was that defeat of Sudarshan TV will be defeat of Hinduism. So this really shook me for the day. Anyway, coming to the topic, I will focus because Rajni has already given a very profound and deep understanding which we need to integrate in our thinking. I will just focus on Gandhi, religion, freedom of religion, which we have been debating, feeling the heat from last 3 decades in particular. This I will like to do in two small parts. And the first part of this is that Gandhi's own understanding of religion. Of course, we all know that Gandhi came from a family of Parinam Panthis, where there are some Islamic traditions, Muslim traditions, Hindu traditions. There is a inheritance of that. I'm not saying that it is just because of inheritance, but it did influence him partly. And secondly, when he was studying in England, he came in contact with some Christian missionaries, and Sermon on the Mount also influenced him very deeply, from where he picked up, of course, this is my interpretation, there may be more deeper aspects of that, that love your enemy also. You don't hate the person who's oppressing you, but you hate the ideology, which came out in the classical form that I hate the British rule, but not the Britishers. And the major contribution which I regard of Gandhi in his all the social movements, freedom movement of India, which of course was the greatest ever mass movement in the world, was that he universalized the idea of love. And it is from this that most of his things flowed. Now, practically speaking, he did call himself a Hindu. And I have no hesitation in saying that he was the greatest Hindu of 20th century. Without any doubt, of course, there are a lot of things which people will say. I'm glad that today's day is also celebrated by United Nations as a day of peace, non-violence. But Gandhi called himself Hindu, but his Hinduism was totally in contrast to the Hinduism which is being not projected, asserted, pushed down on us of the variety, which is totally intolerant, sectarian, and one can say which is a refined version or a sophisticated version of Brahminism, which Dr. Ambedkar tried to oppose all his life. So his own understanding of religion was very open, and there are quotes from him which confuse us in a sense is that at times he will go on to say that I am a good Hindu because I am a good Muslim, I am a good Christian, I am good Sikh, etc., etc. So at least for personally for me, it was very confusing in the beginning. When I tried to understand it, then I realized that what he means by religion is the morality of religion, because religion is a multifaceted phenomenon, a very big phenomenon where faith is there, priestly class is there, holy books are there, and temples, mosques, and all that. The core aspect of religion which Gandhi caught was the morality of religion. And this, I will unhesitatingly say, is a part continuation of the Indian tradition of Bhakti tradition and Sufi tradition, which also take off from people respecting people of all religions and upholding the morality inherent in that particular religion, which tantamounts to humanism also. So in this particular regard, this freedom of religion issue came mainly after this anti-Christian violence in particular picked up after the murder of Pastor Graham Staines, then after Kandhamal violence, when the community Christians were accused of converting, and that label was stuck on them that they are converting, etc., etc. Earlier also we have seen that one of the aspects of demonization of today's Muslims is that Islam was spread on the strength of the sword. It was a imposition by the Muslim kings. So these two things putting together, if when I tried to understand what Gandhi meant to say, Gandhi did say that the forcible conversion, imposition of religion is totally wrong. But accepting the religions which people feel comfortable with, which people feel because of different circumstances, is totally all right. And that time he was, of course, the other stream which was developing in the country, the stream which gave rise to Nathuram Godse, and even that stream which is today ruling the country, that regarded Hinduism as the Hinduism oblique in bracket Brahminism as the religion of this land, and particularly it regarded Christianity and Islam as the foreign religions. So let me tell you that Gandhi in his different writings tells that these are Indian religions. First, of course, I don't believe that religions have a nationality. Religion's values have a universal spirit, universal appeal. They cannot be bound by the national boundaries as the communalists try to do. And even in Indian constitution, of course, Irfan, my dear friend, will be elaborating much more on the legal provisions, etc., etc. Roughly what I have learned is that Articles 25 to 30 give us the choice that we are free to practice, preach, and propagate our religion. So this was in nutshell what Indian Constitution stood for, that there is a diversity of religions in the country, and it is my free will to follow my religion or not to follow any religion, or not to follow any religion, that is also my free will, and to talk about my religion, to propagate my religion. So this freedom of religion, which is inherent in Indian constitution, later on with the rise of politics in the name of Hindu religion, it has nothing to do with the Hinduism of Gandhi in any way. with the rise of that particular politics, when Christians were to be targeted, Muslims were to be targeted, this conversion was used as one of the big weapons by the communalists to polarize the society, to create sort of divisions in the society. I must say, it is precisely around religion's moral values that Gandhi was able to create one of the three pillars of India's constitution: liberty, equality, fraternity. In my understanding, Gandhi could create Indian fraternity. Sorry to be a male-oriented word. Instead of fraternity, probably one can use community also. Gandhi was able to create this Indian community because of his understanding of religion at the deepest level, where religion was not supposed to be the boundary between the people, but morality of religion was supposed to be the bridge connecting people of different religions. So it is here that I see Gandhi's great contribution, that religion is my personal matter, it is my personal choice, and freedom of religion is my right as a human being, as an Indian citizen, and as a global person. At all the three levels, I have a freedom to choose. I have freedom to choose my religion or not to follow any religion, depending on the person's own understanding of the things. But of course, I will like to point out a bit that this whole issue, once we were talking to one UN rapporteur, and he told that what has been popularized in India, that Muslims are terrorists and Christians are converters. So truth apart, he recently also, if you know, one of the MPs in Lok Sabha said something very derogatory about Pastor Graham Stewart Staines. And I must say that here conversion is being used as a pretext for the political agenda of certain political organizations. And of course, I do quote the figures that as far as Islam is concerned, Swami Vivekananda, Collected Works, Volume 3, published in 1979, points out that it is wrong to say that Islam was spread on the strength of the soul. The people suffering the atrocity of caste Varna system escaped from this by converting to Islam or other religions. This is what Swami Vivekananda has to tell. And as I was talking about today's plight of Christians, of course, the violence against Muslims is so big that violence against Christians somehow becomes a smaller line, sometimes invisible. But believe me, the organization like Persecution Relief tells us that there is a 40% increase in the scattered sub-radar level anti-Christian violence in the period of COVID itself. And the pretext is that these Christian missionaries are converting. So as far as the real data is concerned, just one data I'll give you, it is a long topic itself. In 1971, the percentage of Christians was 2.6%. And in 2011 census, the percentage of Christians is 2.3%, 2.3%. So 2.6 to 2.3. And this 2.3% of the Christians, so-called conversion, has taken place over a period of 1950 years, because Christianity is older in India than it was even in America or many other places. So freedom of religion, as far as Gandhi is concerned, is absolutely clear. And here also he says, second point, he says that my religion is not going to dictate the state policies. Here, whatever he means, one of his quotes says that I am a Hindu, I can give my life for my religion. Now, this is very surprising thing. Here he is saying I can give my life for my religion, and what is happening that today people are taking others' lives in the name of religion. What a contrast! What a different type of thing. Anyway, coming back to Gandhi, I am a Hindu, I can give my life for my religion, but that is my personal matter. The state for whose fashioning I am struggling will be guided neither by your religion nor by my religion. The duty of the state will be to look after people's welfare. In my language, I'm slightly not reading the quote because I generally don't read. I'm just giving the spirit of that. The duty of the state will be to look after people's welfare. In other words, bread, butter, shelter, employment, education, agricultural welfare, etc., etc. And religion will play the role of a moral guide. So in that sense, I feel, while I congratulate you people for organizing this webinar, I think these ideas have to be spread to the people. And if we want to follow the path of Gandhi, please remember in the final phases of his life, because that time anti-Christian violence was not so prominent. What was prominent was Hindu-Muslim violence. And that's why one of the central pillars of Gandhi's teaching was Hindu-Muslim unity. So freedom of religion, you talk at legal level, at social level, at political level, at whatever level you talk, Gandhi stands tall. Gandhi stands tall to put forward morality as religion, respecting people of all religions. And that's why one of the definitions which people put forward of that word secularism is equal respect for all religions. So on this 2nd October, I think the real tribute to Gandhi will be that the misconceptions because of which the anti-Christian violence takes place, anti-Muslim violence takes place, and the religious amity is damaged, those misconceptions we remove from taking off from Gandhi and struggling against those misconceptions and promoting the harmony values of Gandhi's Sufi tradition and Bhakti tradition, I think will be the real tribute to Gandhi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ram, for making that very good distinction between what Hindu religion meant to Gandhi and what is being thrusted upon our throats today. So thank you. Just very shortly, I would like to welcome Harbans Mukhia ji, who is a very renowned historian who has joined this meeting, and also Jagmohan Singh ji. Welcome, of course, along with all the other participants. With this, I would like to welcome Prabodh Parekh ji to please share his opinions. Prabodh ji, please unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can. Yes.
Okay. Namaskar. Let me make some efforts to historicize Gandhi and ourselves. On face of it, we in contemporary India have inherited a constitution and a vision of the world that promises every child freedom to practice and follow, or choose not to follow or practice, religious traditions that he or she is born into. It is a gift bestowed upon us that has a history fraught with innumerable events, filled with long history of bloodbath, all through the civilization that evolved in a manner that made religious pluralism as something that came naturally as a given, or that's what we thought. But if we carefully look into the way by which individuals, communities, and nation experience and retain some historical memory, which has not resolved resentment and as well as animosity and the desire to take revenge, along with this civilizational project that has been going on for centuries, which speaks up through the phenomena of Gandhi and Tagore. We need to remember that large number of individuals, communities, and nation as a whole often carries with it an unresolved resentment towards one another. Let me spell it out a little more. Now, Gandhi, of course, was as religious as any human being can claim to be, and as committed to feel for the sacred that as incomplete and contingent human beings that we are, and as secular as any freedom-seeking individuals can be. He was extremely sensitive and well-informed of the unresolved animosity and prejudices that generally prevailed in the hearts of his fellow human beings. So much so in his heart also. But he was fortunate enough to have been born into that small place which he imbibed quite spontaneously and naturally, the Pranami Sampradaya, and then the Jain traditions that surrounded his words. And then years in London, when he actually went through the crisis of faith, quote unquote, of not feeling at home with the received and inherited tradition of Vaishnavism and the Jain thoughts and the Pranami Sampradaya, and was very tempted to convert himself into a Christian. Not that that would have worked as magic, but at that time, he corresponded extensively to resolve his own seeking of the clarity about what is it to have a religiosity as a way of life. And he did apparently resolve it with the help of conversations and correspondence between him and Srimad Rajchandra. This went on all the way through his experiments in establishing ashrams. The ashrams that he continued as a tradition where he was extremely disciplinary and strict about the niyamas, about the yama and niyamas that must be followed in order to accept that. And in that sense, he was very demanding, but at the same time, being deeply rooted into the traditions, and there were multiple traditions, and deeply familiar and informed about the ways others practice their own inheritances. He realized that India, which was his karma bhumi, which is where he functioned in the secular world, in the everyday life, he realized that we haven't yet resolved the deep-rooted historical memory of animosity and resentment. And therefore, he was relentlessly committed for all his life to two questions. One was to come to terms with being a Hindu, which carried an extremely dark chapter. He found that the Hindu-Muslim issues are at the heart of what he considered to be only valid way of being human, which is non-violence. And he found that Hindu-Muslim animosity will never allow him to even mention the idea of ahimsa in a manner where it can be effective. And therefore, he committed himself to these two questions. Perhaps little more than seeking Swaraj, he was deeply anguished and continuously, relentlessly working on these two experiments, two adventures. Is it possible to create a world in which what is practiced is a non-resentment? Of course, beyond raga dvesh, beyond the ways by which we carry within ourselves a desire to settle scores, which has to do with history. Now, surprisingly, because Gandhi was very clear about being incomplete forever, being human is being incomplete. Apurnata was his major understanding of the self that we are. And therefore, all religions for him always about complementing one another. By definition, religions were not complete in themselves. Any given religion, any given religious tradition were not complete in itself, and therefore it required a continuous complementing that happens when you come into contact with other traditions and practices. Tagore had a similar idea when he talked about that how when the Dravidians and Aryans collided for the first time, that created energy for a new civilization to emerge. And in that sense, Gandhi actually felt that it was very crucial that all these traditions in one way or the other continue to converse. And he realized that, but it's not going to happen till at a pragmatic and practical level, he is able to arrive at some resolution about the resentment and animosity that we carry within our heart. And we all do that. Because he was fortunate enough to be born into a Pranami Sampradaya, because he was fortunate enough to reach out to Jain traditions and Vaishnava traditions, because he was deeply familiar with the Bhakti Parampara of entire nation, not only in India, but I like to think from all over the world. And because he went on to carry on his friendship against all odds. I mean, if you were to recollect his childhood friend who was quite a nasty friend, but he stood by him, this ability to enter into the other was something that he was fortunate to have. He nourished it, he imbibed it, and he lived with it. I think the challenge for all of us is, having taken the constitution and secularism for granted, we are suffering the consequences of not having resolved the resentment and prejudices that every second Indian carries within himself or herself, which explains the ease with which large number of individuals, in spite of having Bhakti tradition deeply rooted in their psyche, large number of Indians are at home with an ideology of revenge and settling the score. If we can address ourselves to this question without romanticizing Gandhi, but by standing by his courage and conviction to have a lifelong battle against his resentment, as historian Sudhir Chandra puts it so well, then we will realize the impossible possibility, the asambhav sambhavna of a man called Mohandas Gandhi as a fellow Indian. It's a challenge which we haven't yet found a clue as how to face that challenge of creating a world which is not resentful of the presence of the other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabodhpariji. Can we invite Irfan Engineer to please ask?
Thank you, Neha, for inviting me. The Sangh Parivar has been trying to appropriate Mahatma Gandhi in order to mislead people to believe that Gandhiji and Sangh Parivar have similar views. Nothing can be further from truth. The Prime Minister is also trying to reduce Gandhiji to an icon for their Swachh Bharat mission. The future generations might think that Mahatma Gandhi was someone who swept the streets of India very sincerely. Let us not forget that a follower of Hindutva political ideology, Nathuram Godse, assassinated Gandhiji, as Hindutva was fundamentally opposed to Gandhiji's idea of inclusive nationalism based on Hindu-Muslim unity and removal of untouchability. We propose to examine Gandhiji's approach towards Hindu-Muslim unity. Gandhiji had an ambivalent attitude towards secularism. At one time, he would oppose the idea, but later he would support. His support or opposition would depend on how one imagined the concept of secularism. Gandhiji famously stated that those who talk of separation of religion or politics know little about both. Should religion be based on irreligiousness, he asked. However, religion to Gandhiji meant moral values of love, compassion, brotherhood, and sisterhood of all. Religion to Gandhiji meant more than rituals, institutional arrangements, priesthood structures, and more than boundaries and walls essentializing distinctions between religions. If religion was reduced to bundle of religious doctrines or source of dividing human beings and constructing walls of identity, in that sense, religion should have no place in politics. Religion, according to Gandhiji, could be a source of uniting human beings, even if they followed different religions. If we give up the feeling of supremacy of religion or demanding privileges on the basis of religion, then existence of different religions will no longer divide people. The key to solution of the tangle of different religions, he wrote, lies in everyone following the best in his own religion and entertaining equal regard for other religions and their followers. Hindu-Muslim unity requires Muslims to tolerate not as a virtue of necessity, not as a policy, but as a part of their religion, the religions of others also, so long as they, the latter, believe it to be true. Gandhiji would require all to accept all religions to be true. I should love all the men, I'm quoting Gandhiji, I should love all the men, not only in India, but in the world, belonging to different faiths, to become better people by contact with one another. And if that happens, the world will be much better place to live in than it is today. At the same time, Gandhiji was against the idea of a state associating with any religion and vice versa. That would harm the religion in question as well as the state. Religion for Gandhiji was personal matter in so much as it was for individuals to choose his or her path to God. No third party should have any role or say in the matter. Both the aforesaid propositions are at fundamental variance with Hindutva political ideology. Sangh Parivar misuses Hindu culture to define their idea of quote-unquote nation and propagate that Hindu religion and culture is superior to any other religion and culture in the world. And Hindus were Vishwa Gurus in the past, and they should once more dominate the world. They further believe that the state should be subservient to Hindu society or Hindu nation. Gandhiji entertained no such ideas. In fact, religion should not become an identity marker. The moral teachings of all religions were more important than they are, and they are similar. The superficial difference arose from rituals and cultural traditions, Gandhi wrote. I do regard Islam to be religion of peace and in the same sense as Christianity, Buddhism and Hinduism are. No doubt there are differences in degrees, but the object of these religion is peace. He further wrote in his autobiography, and I quote, I began reading Gita with the Theosophists. Reading of New Testament produced a different impression, especially the Sermon on the Mount, which went straight to my heart. I compared it with Gita. My young mind tried to unify teachings of Gita, the Light of Asia, and the Sermon of the Mount. The master key to understand underlying unity within all religions was truth and non-violence. Gandhi wrote, after study of religions to the extent it was possible for me, I have come to the conclusion that if it is proper and necessary to discover an underlying unity among all religions, a master key is needed. That master key is that of truth and non-violence. When I unlock the chest of a religion with this master key, I do not find it difficult to discover its likeness with other religions. Discovering this source of unity in religion then became source of unity between communities. Heart unity between the communities, he wrote, can be built only if we learn to sacrifice everything we have, even our life, for the sake of truth and for the sake of religion. As Ram pointed out, today we think of taking others' life for religion, not sacrificing our own life. Religion must teach humans to rise above ordinary and sacrifice for the gain of others and for achieving higher goal of truth and non-violence. Gandhiji opined, individual sacrifices for the community sacrifices itself for the district for the province, and the province for the nation, and nation for the world. Today we are talking about nationalism versus universalism or versus other countries and other nationalism. Neither religion nor even nationalism divided the world. Gandhiji's call for nation to sacrifice for higher interests of the world. These sacrifices should not only be for the community, not even only for the nation, but for the world. A man whose spirit of sacrifice does not go beyond his own community becomes selfish himself and also makes his community selfish, Gandhiji wrote. Unlike others, to Gandhiji, religion did not mean only bundle of theological doctrines or rituals. Gandhiji believed in lived religion rather than believed religion. Religion essentially meant service to humanity and to the neediest. Gandhiji wrote in his autobiography, and I quote, I had made religion of sacrifice my own, as I felt that God could be realized only through service. And service for me was service of India. Mine is religion of tapascharya. It is amazing that Hinduism, or for that matter any religion, can produce opposite poles. Hinduism in the hands of Gandhi is a resource to build a humane society. Gandhiji claimed to be not only a Sanatani Hindu, but also a good Muslim, a good Christian, and a good follower of all religions. Gandhiji's Hinduism and his formula to discern underlying unity within all religions influenced millions of Indians during the freedom struggle. If India did not become Hindu Rashtra in 1947, even though Pakistan was created as a homeland for Muslims and became Islamic State, Gandhiji's moral influence and Hinduism played a predominant role. That is why followers of Hindutva political ideology had to eliminate Gandhiji. The one-man army against communal riots did his job fearlessly and lived his Hinduism. At the same time, Hinduism can be misused by Sangh Parivar as a resource to spread hatred against non-Hindus, particularly amongst Muslims and Christians, which is considered as foreign religions, quote-unquote foreign religions. Sangh Parivar's Hinduism is intolerant or of other, also of other Hindus who do not think like them. Followers of Hindutva ideology assassinated Gandhiji in recent times killed Comrade Govind Pansare, Narendra Dabholkar, M.M. Kalburgi, Gauri Lankesh. It justifies caste hierarchy which oppresses Dalits and treats women as second-class citizens. Religion has not yet lost its influence in Asian societies and will not anytime soon. In the contest between religion and atheism, the former would win hands down. The contest has to be between religion as a source of moral values like love, compassion, forgiveness, justice, and equality, guiding the followers to becoming better human beings on one hand, and using religion as a resource to shape political state or justify construction of a society which accepts hegemony of one community over others and one section of the society over others on the other hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfanji, for all those valuable points. We have many interesting comments in the chat box. However, there are two questions that are posed to the panel. So I would like to read it out.
Neha, may I request you that if
Yeah.
there are any specific questions for Rajni ji, read them out first because she may
No,
she wants to leave early.
No, she has already left, and there is this. These questions are posed to the panel, not to any particular
Okay.
panel.
Okay.
So that's why I would like to read them out. One
Neha,
is,
Neha, can you take the responsibility of
Yeah.
naming the person on the panel who should answer that? I think we will leave it to you rather than we getting confused who has to answer it.
okay, okay.
Yeah. Please.
So the
Hmm.
okay. So the first question is by Animesh. He has asked, in such environment, what could be practical, actionable, and effective steps that we can take to respond to the situation? So can I request Ram to take this first question?
Yeah, I was expecting that since I suggested you will take that liberty. I think this question is a very important and very profound question, because today what we are facing, and when we remember the whole thing on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, problem is not limited to just religiosity, non-violence, satyagraha. I think politics has been cultivated in the name of Hindu religion. Politics has been cultivated in the name of Hindu religion. Let me point out 4 or 5 steps of how this politics has become stronger. Number one, internally speaking, there has been a spread of misconceptions against religious minorities. Number one, because of these misconceptions, it is easy to orchestrate the communal violence by those who benefit from that. Number three, because of the communal violence, there is polarization, and as Yale University points out, and as our great friend Asghar Ali, engineer, and scholars like Paul Brass point out, that after every communal violence, a particular political formation which becomes stronger. I leave it to your guess which political power has become stronger because of this intense communal violence. And lastly, it is because of that the politics in the name of religion becomes stronger and divisive. So if we understand, if as I understand these 5 steps, these are the steps which we have to undo. And in my understanding, I think somehow, unless we can create this misconception in the mind of the people, it will be very difficult to fight against the forces of sectarianism, politics in the name of sectarianism. Here, in this step, I will focus that we have to promote love, harmony, amity. We have to promote, to use a word, a particular narrative, because one narrative has come up, has become popular, has become part of the social common sense, that this is a land of Hindus, Christians are foreigners, Muslims are foreigners, Muslims are bad like this, Christians are bad like this. So this narrative has to be countered by the narrative which Mahatma Gandhi gave in the book Hind Swaraj. Very interesting. He says Hindu kings were there, Muslims were their subjects. Muslim kings were there, Hindus were their subject. So there was no animosity on this count. And the second part of this narrative comes from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who calls our culture as Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. So starting from Bhakti Sufi traditions, harmonious society, emphasis on morality, emphasis on respect, this is what we have to promote. And then to concretely counter the false propaganda which is going on. So this narrative has to be made part of the social common sense. We have not been able to do it. We need more efforts, that I think all of us have to put our heads together. So this is one. Second is building the bridges of love in the community. And here nothing can be a better model than Mahatma Gandhi himself. How he went on for his whole freedom movement, incorporating all the religious communities, and how we can implement in our personal life, social life, and political life. That I think becomes very, very important for us. So this is very, very tall order. In this, there is a place of cultural interventions, which are, I think, central to it. screening of good films, propagating of good material. Now, I will not go into the details of, like one, of course, I will say Anand Patwardhan's various films, particularly Vivek, Reason, are a must. Shyam Benegal series, Bharat Ek Khoj, are a must. And other cultural expressions, which are a bit difficult but very important, like what we call in Hindi Nukkad Natak, most effective way to propagate the things amongst the people. Then common celebration of social aspects of religion. There is Eid, there is Diwali, there is Christmas, there is a religious part that community can do. But the social part of interaction, hugging each other, distributing pleasures, that I think has to be promoted. So this is at social level. And at political level, of course, it is a very difficult question. And political level, we are very fragmented. And we have to ensure that all those parties which have even a semblance of respect for Gandhi, semblance of respect for Indian Constitution, need to have to be brought together by the force of social movements. Here I'm inversing the equation. Appealing to the party. Why will parties listen to you? Because they have narrow sectarian interest for the power. Every party wants to come to power. It may be regional party, it may be different party, and the advantage of this is taken by BJP. Sorry to be spelling this word. Now, so this is here. I think I still believe, as I say repeatedly, that the number of people who believe in diversity, pluralism are much more. Point is, we are fragmented. Our social movements are very good. It may be related to Narmada, it may be related to peasants movement, it may be related to workers movement. They are doing a great job. But question is, there is a lack of a common platform in which they can shake hands with each other, rub shoulder to shoulder, and demonstrate to the political parties that we have all to be together. And from here, then the appeal to the parties at political level. Because politics, finally, of course, controls the society. So these are multi-layered efforts. It is not a single step which we need. These multiple layers are what we need to undertake over a period of time. Of course, we can dissect it, we can deconstruct it. Each of us, of course, this is appeal. If each of us can take one small little work, devote some little time to ensure filling a part of this gap, which in turn can be the our answer, our Gandhian method, non-violence, peace, harmony, and uniting the community. This will be our step in going towards a society where the real democracy can flourish, and criticizing the government may not become anti-national, but it will be welcome, because it is only through criticism that the policies can be improvised. And that's what, in that direction, we have to go. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. The
Prabhu bhai,
next,
if you want to answer the question, you could answer also.
yeah, if any of the other panelists want to answer the same question, they can.
Unmute yourself, Prabhu bhai.
Ram has already suggested some extremely practical ways of taking up this question. I think what has happened is that many of us took for granted what we had been given as a gift. And some of us thoroughly enjoyed to use a convenient umbrella term, the liberal space, which allowed us to kind of improvise and fantasize our lives. In the process, we have ended up becoming as much, we are appropriating the world with the same ease as people with whose ideology we feel very deeply distressed and uncomfortable. So we are all in it, we are caught up. And this self-introspection is not helping much. It's only bringing deep unease and sometimes unhappiness with the way world is going. But but I suggest that there must be some way of addressing to the historical memory which requires correction. Well, not correction, but which requires much more informed pedagogy. I wish our children will return back to understanding the genocides that are all over the world, to understand even a simple event like, a simple meaning traumatic event like 2002. I mean, it happens in Gandhi's Gujarat. Gandhi's Gujarat is so comfortable with another Gujarat these days. So it's a challenge for which I don't have any clarity except transforming one's own life in terms of the resentment to reach out to the other. Gandhi, as I said, was very fortunate. He was born into the world of others. While we haven't, many of us haven't reached out. That's just one of the ways I can respond. And there are many ways of doing it among very young people.
Yes, do read out other questions.
Yeah. The next question is by Zainab Banerjee. It says religious morality has almost withered away in contemporary India. How to re-establish it to evolve bhaichara among people? So this question, may I request again Prabodhji to answer it first and then Irfanji to answer it. Prabodhji, are you there?
Just repeat the question, Neha.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. It's by Zainab Bano. She says, religious morality has almost withered away in contemporary India. How to re-establish it to evolve bhaichara amongst the people? So, how do we re-establish religious morality in India?
Actually, there are many things that can be done. I'll give very brief answer. And Prabodh Bhai also could join me in giving the answer. Gandhiji's solution was simple. One, emphasize the moral aspects of religion and lived religion rather than believed religion. Go away from merely doctrines, but discover religion, experiment with religion to understand the truth. Truth is the key to understanding underlying unity. And truth means knowledge. Truth also means using reason. So, not getting bogged down with the structures, the institutional structures, or and merely doctrines. And truth has to be understood towards establishing a non-violent society. Gandhiji's solution, I think, was the solution lies in you and me, in all of us. It doesn't lie in state alone. Of course, state also has to take its share of responsibility, but in you and me as well. And how, if we just read or understand only our own religion, then we won't go far. We will be, we will build walls that divide us on the basis of doctrines, on the basis of theology, on the basis of culture, traditions, practices, etc., etc. This we, they divide. Gandhiji says, study not only your religion, but also goodness of other religion. Find truth and non-violence in other religions as well. So he's inviting us to study other religions as well. And I think that is the key to be building. Education is the key. I think if we can teach morals of all religions and the value of truth, reason, and non-violence to all students, then I think that could perhaps be a step towards.
Okay.
Prabodh Bhai also.
Does Prabodhji and Ram want to answer the same question.
Actually, Irfan has covered these points, and in my first question also, I took up many of the practical steps. So I leave it to Prabodhji if he has to add something. I think I have made my point, and I endorse what Irfan is saying.
Yeah, something similar. But you know, there is also some unease, as I said, in a world which is so deeply enchanted with consuming it that in a very specific sense, Gandhi isn't available because unless we seriously reflect on the idea of simplicity, and that looks extremely complicated now. So we would like to, as if, retain all the ways by consuming and appropriating the world, and at the same time retain the moral, the inviting moral sense of simplicity and the kind of achar which are coming together in the kind of life we lead. I think it's going to be extremely challenging to retain some aspect of Gandhi and not take him up in totality. Then he just becomes one possible way by which small number of individuals conduct their lives, and that's the human fate, I think. But as I said, the game is still on, and Gandhi still is extremely inviting as a possible impossibility.
Okay. We have one last question, and I think it will take all the wisdom of all the three panelists and whoever wants to answer this. But the question is from Ratati. She asks, how does a narrow, divisive perspective become a popular narrative? Are the majority of the people not able to differentiate between what is good for everyone? So yeah, it's all about narrative and how does a narrow, decisive perspective become popular narrative? So any of the panelists wants to take this question.
Can I begin? Can I begin?
Yes, yes.
Now I will talk more at practical level. Now during freedom movement, one narrative, that of Gandhi and Nehru, was part of the social movements, and people were learning from these two great people about the reality of India. Now on the margins, that time it was in the margins. On one side, Muslim League was propagating another narrative, and Hindu Mahasabha, RSS were also creating another narrative. So Muslim League's narrative was that we, the Muslims, have been the rulers of this country and Hindus had been subordinate. This was their narrative. Of course, this narrative was one of the components of creating partition, resulting in partition, of course, under the British policy of divide and rule. But this narrative got marginalized with the partition, went as the major communal elements went to Pakistan. The third narrative, which was going on at slower level, was that by Hindu Mahasabha partly and mainly by RSS. RSS created a module that it has been a Hindu nation from times immemorial, that everything was great here, castes were equal and women were honored. But the problem started with the coming of Muslims and then coming of British, coming of Christians. That is how they put it. And then in that, what they did, they created the particular unit of Shakha. Shakha, where the children between 5 to 15 years play, and in between they are given the doses of this particular ideology. And this ideology uses communal historiography in a selected way. So Rana Pratap versus Akbar, Rana Pratap, a great Hindu nationalist, Shivaji versus Afzal Khan, Shivaji versus Aurangzeb, Shivaji, a great Hindu nationalist. So these stories, which were projected constantly, round the clock, all the time, from last 95 years. This Shakha Bauddhiks were supplemented by Ekal Vidyalaya, Saraswati Shishu Mandir, and other paraphernalia. Then there was an infiltration of these ideas in the media more after Lal Krishna Advani became Information and Broadcasting Minister in the Junta government, which came after emergency. And after that, there was a deliberate construction of IT cell social media was the first one which they started using in a very, very powerful, multi-layered way. So this actually, all of us in the society do not have time to do the critical thinking, do the critical thinking. So whatever comes as the first impression becomes part of our average psychology. And after 2002, once Modi became chief minister, the corporate world started hovering around him. And I think nearly 80% of our TV channels are controlled by them. They are around this ideology. A large section of print media, languages, that is also controlled by them. So this bombardment is capable of spreading all this particular narrative of Hindu nationalism very, very broadly. So it is not that people are not having critical thinking or having love and affection, but the bombardment and the systematic cultivation of this at the ground level has been so intense and became much more intense in last 30 years once this Babri Mosque issue came up, Ram Temple issue came up. It became much more this thing. So I won't blame, I mean, I don't know who to blame, but there is one particular force very much bent upon spreading these ideas. Of course, it is a good question. People also have thinking capabilities, but I think people's own lives are so much bogged down by problems of daily life that going to the depth of this, which is constantly bombarded on the people, going against that grain is difficult. And here is I'm reminded by the one very famous sentence by one of the greatest philosophers of the world, Karl Marx. He says, ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. Ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. So modify it. Ruling ideas are the ideas of the dominant political force. One. And second is a great, great linguist and a great human rights activist, Noam Chomsky, who uses the word manufacturing consent. So manufacturing consent operates at the level of state, and manufacturing social common sense operates at the level of society. So combining these two, people passively accept that. So large section accepts it passively. Some sections become more committed to this sort of ideology, and they push it forward more aggressively. So there are multiple things. And then lately, there is the addition of fake news. There is the addition of this thinkable thought and unthinkable thought. So because of this, some thoughts become thinkable. So when we are greatly disturbed by Babri Masjid judgment, there are great celebrations also. Now, when we are commemorating Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birthday, on the same day, what is topping on the Twitter is long live Nathuram Godse. So this is, I think here, one of my friends pointed out that the Marxists generally used to believe that base affects the superstructure. Here, superstructure is so dominant that it is trying to influence the base. Of course, this is a very jargonish language. I don't want to go into that. But basically, the efforts from the progressive, democratic, pluralist sections to penetrate this wall of misinformation has been very little. And of course, here I compliment my late friend Asghar Ali Engineer, who realized this problem, and from probably 1980s, he began his work. I pay my respect to K.N. Panikkar, who at cultural level recognized it and started. But by and large, the major section of society kept quiet. Talking of myself, till 1992 rather, when Babri Mosque was demolished, I used to believe, oh, what is this Hindu-Muslim issue? This will get dissolved once the society progresses more, people are in a better position, all this will get all this will be melted away. But question is, more than their success who are spreading the communal poison, it is a failure of progressive elements believing in pluralism, harmony, love, non-violence, who, as was pointed out, that we took the things for granted. Gandhi has led the movement on the very positive ground. Jawaharlal Nehru has backed it up by wonderful infrastructural development of the country. So we were relaxed. We never felt this incipient marginalized ideology which was there during the early period of freedom movement will become so strong and monstrous because of its own hard work. So that is my understanding. So equally, when it is a failure, I think it is a failure on the part of the social movements, part of the political parties, and I myself implicate as one of the persons who, not as an individual, but people like me, that we did not take this issue seriously and did not campaign successfully against the wrong notions of people's ideas. We forgot that it is ideas which ultimately shape the actions. And that's where I think it is a two-way. One is success on the part of the divisive ideology. Second is failure on the part of those who should have combated it long ago. So that's it. Thank you.
Any quick responses from the other two panelists to this question? Irfanji, Prabodji, any quick responses?
Very, very small note. I must, on the other hand, confess that Gandhi is not a matter of past. Unlike large number of extraordinary individuals who have dreamt of a just society, Gandhi happens to be almost our contemporary. And I must say that he was actually able to create a narrative as powerfully and as effectively as the contemporary media is doing. He manufactured consent for satyagraha and connecting it with simplicity and good life. And I'm sure you and I both have memories of our grandparents who actually participated in that experiment, on the whole quite gently and successfully. So in that limited sense, Gandhi can be recovered. I don't know in manufacturing a new kind of consent, but it's a possibility. One must continue to dream of. That's all I would say.
Irfanji?
Yeah, very, very quick response because of lack of time. I would say that there is a selfish element in all of us. And the communal politics taps that selfishness. It tries to enhance that. Both capitalism as well as communal politics taps that selfishness. The neoliberal market wants to make you more and more individualistic and more selfish. The Gandhian solution to overcome this narrow divisions, the sectarian divisions, is one of sacrifice, building a community of solidarity. And let's remember that 80% of the world's population, including that of India, is living in poverty and hunger, while 1%, richest 1% are living in vulgar luxuries. This vulgarness has to be brought in. If we, Gandhi says that individual sacrifices for the community, community sacrifices for the district. So this value of sacrifice and the mantra of society adopting the mantra of serving the most needy, Antyodaya. If we imbibe these values rather than selfishness, if we try to struggle and fight against selfishness within us, I think that is the path that Gandhi would recommend. Very interestingly, in we have been organizing a series of webinars since past 5 days, from Bhagat Singh to Gandhi. In that, one of the resource persons, Professor Hemant Shah, said a very, very important thing. And that is, if Gandhi was here in India today, if Gandhi was born today, what would he have done? He would have been doing the same satyagraha to fight the same policies of the the policies that he fought against colonial government. He would be fighting, he would be offering satyagrahas and mobilizing people, whether he succeeds or not. So I think we have to build this community of solidarities with the spirit of sacrifice and serving the most needy. If these are the values we imbibe and fight our own selfishness, we can overcome the narrow sectarian ideas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Like I said, it needed all the wisdom of all the three panelists to really answer these very practical but important questions. I think the panel has really brought out some profound thoughts of Gandhi and how they're applicable today. Of course, the oft-repeated principles of satyagraha, ahimsa, love, compassion, and most importantly, what religion meant to Gandhi and how are we to really look at it in the perspective, the context given today, where you have, people acquitted by the Supreme Court after the world has seen the demolition of the Babri Masjid. Then we have girls being insecure over here, caste violence. So I think this was a very enriching session. I think all the four panelists were wonderful. I'm sure we are going away with a lot of thoughts and a lot of thoughts to reflect upon after this session. May I invite Suraj to propose a vote of thanks? Unfortunately, we do not have any more time for any more questions.
Yeah. Before I think Stanley wants to, Mr. Stanley will make a small announcement about our future event.
Sure.
Stanley?
Yeah. The CFTC, which is the Citizens for the Constitution, celebrates 1 year on Gandhi Jayanti. I think the emphasis of CFTC has been to focus on the Constitution and democracy. So we looked at various aspects in spreading the knowledge, differentiating between what is preached and what is practiced in the Constitution and democracy. And we would like to move, today there was a topic on freedom of religion. We would like to move to various other aspects of the Constitution and democracy. And towards it, we have a program now. The next program is on, please mark your date, 7th of November, where we will look at dissent in democracy. So very, very important. And to do this, we have invited young IAS officers who have taken the challenging, role of dissenting while in government. So you will see, they were in the news recently, and you will see them live talking to all of us on what is your role, what is my role, what is their role when you look at something going wrong. Yeah. So I would request you to mark your date, 7th November. This will be the evening around 7 o'clock, but the date and the date is fixed. The time will be communicated to you. Thank you, Suraj.
On a similar note, like Irfanji has written in the chat box, we also, and he mentioned that we had a campaign for 5 days, that is justice, equality, liberty from Gandhi to Bhagat Singh, or rather Bhagat Singh to Gandhi. So today is the last day of that campaign, and we have a cultural program in the evening. First is by Sandhya Naik, who is a Bombay-based artist and singer, Swaraj Ki Khoj. And then it is followed by a performance by Shankar Chaturvedi from UP. So you all are invited for that. I request Suraj if he can, before he ends this meeting, if he can share the link of that, a Zoom link.
The link has been shared already.
Yeah.
In the chat box.
Yeah. So please feel free. We invite everyone to be a part of it. And Suraj, please, if you can propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Neha. It is indeed a privilege for me to this vote of thanks. First and foremost, I owe a small apology. I'm so sorry, extremely sorry. Inadvertently, as wrong Zoom details were shared in the text version of the invite. So I'm so sorry. So would request all the attendees and participants to share this talk, which is there on our Facebook page, C++ Facebook page, with others also who has missed this. I'm so sorry for that. Having said that, it was indeed a very enlightening talk by all the speakers. So I would like to thank on behalf of CFTC, Citizens for the Constitutions, to all our speakers, Ms. Rajni Bakshi, Dr. Ram Punyani, Professor Prabodh Parekh, and Advocate Irfan Engineer for this enlightening talk. I would also like to thank our organizing committee members, namely Reverend Devdan Tribhuvan, Stanley Fernandez, Dolphy D'Souza, Irfan Engineer, among others, to organizing this wonderful webinars. And of course, Stanley mentioned, we have the next webinar on 7th November. And lastly, I would also like to thank all the participants and attendees without which this event wouldn't be this successful. So thanks a lot to all the participants, and we hope we all try to live on the Gandhian principle of ahimsa and non-violence, etc. Thank you. Thank you all.